Hey, everybody. Good evening, and thank you so much for joining us. My name is Scott. I'm your MC for the evening. It's really wonderful that of all the places you could have chosen to be tonight, you're here with us. We've got a really special evening planned. I'd like to start with an acknowledgement that wherever we're dialing in from tonight, wherever across this great continent or indeed around the world we are, we're on unceded Aboriginal land. We're on land that was taken by force, and to acknowledge and celebrate the continuation of the oldest living culture on Earth, including people who were harmed directly by the industry that we're going to confront and help abolish this evening. Tonight, we also acknowledge that it's 80 years since the first atomic bombs were dropped, two events 3 days apart in Japan that killed at least 200,000 people straight away and cast a shadow 80 years long that's now coming into its fourth generation of campaigners and people who have worked across all domains of life, culturally, politically, diplomatically, economically, to make sure that these events never occur again. And we've succeeded. And so tonight is a commemoration, but it's also in part a celebration that the commitment that our parents and grandparents made after the dropping of the atomic bombs, that this would never happen again, including by some of the speakers this evening, we've upheld it. We've upheld it. Some survival instinct, species-wide, has kept the finger off the trigger, and that's how we are even able to have this conversation. So we're here grounded in commemoration and in memory, but also in hope. We've got our eyes fixed very firmly on the present, even though we will be delving back into the past, because it's never far from our minds that even as we speak, Israel, with the assistance of the United States, of NATO, and shamefully Australia, has dropped the equivalent of 6 Hiroshima-sized nuclear weapons on a captive population about half the size or smaller than half the size of metropolitan Sydney. And that might cause us to give up hope on the so-called international order that we rely on to abolish nuclear weapons. But it has to strengthen our faith in each other and in our collective power. People power brought an end to nuclear weapons testing around the world. People power has stopped uranium mines, it's stopped nuclear waste dumps and power stations all over the world. And people power will bring about an end to the Gaza genocide, and it will ban nuclear weapons. That's what we're here for tonight. If you're skeptical now that there's anything that we can do, and if you're here for the fellowship and the company and the companionship and the commemoration, that's fine. But by the end of the evening, it's our collective ambition that you do believe, because this campaign has a sense of a win and of some optimism around it. We're pushing on an open door, perhaps for the first time in a while. So we're going to bring Australia onto the right side of the campaign to ban nuclear weapons. I want to just preemptively, we'll do this properly a bit later, but preemptively thank everyone from ICAN, the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, who brought us here. An organisation that started in Australia not that long ago and completely rebooted and re-energised international disarmament diplomacy. So by the end of the evening, if you're not already with us, we hope that you will be. We've got an incredible lineup of speakers, literal rock stars, some very interesting political voices from across the political spectrum, including some that might surprise you. And obviously speakers from ICAN, Jem Romold, who's going to give us the lowdown on where the campaign's up to and exactly what we're doing right now to bring this campaign to a head. But first, we've got a very special guest from Japan, Isao Morimoto, who's the son of Junko Morimoto, who survived the atomic bomb attack in Hiroshima. In 1945, he was 13 years old. Isao was born in Osaka in the Kansai region of Japan, and he migrated to Australia in 1981. He's assisted with the production of Junko's children's picture books. One of them, published My Hiroshima, was first published in Australia in 1987. He studied at City Art Institute and he's graduated from AFTRS, the AFTRS, and he was the director or the director's assistant for Blood Oath and directed his own feature film, Ichigen-san, in Japan. It's also worth acknowledging that this is a campaign with 2 Nobel Peace Prizes under its belt. The first was won by ICAN, by the organisation hosting us tonight, in 2017, and the second by Nihon Hidankyo, which is the collective organization raising the voices of the hibakusha, of the atomic bomb survivors. So it's really an honor to welcome you this evening, Morimoto-san. Please come off mute and get us rolling.
Hello. Hi. Yes, my name is Isao, and I'm the son of Junko Morimoto. And she was 13 years old when she survived the atomic bomb attack. That particular morning, she had a diarrhea, which was quite lucky because she didn't go to school where all the students are ordered by military to clear some broken houses, make sure there's no fire spread at the time of further bombing. So 360 friends of hers actually died that day, and my mother survived. And she was very lucky. Her family, none of them are killed in the incident, but the experience was very shocking. And when I grew up, of course, I heard some stories, but when I went to the art school, I just asked her that I want to know exactly what happened at that moment of explosion, because we hear a lot of stories about what people saw, what happened afterwards, and the long period of suffering, losing many of the family members and torment. But I didn't hear exactly what that moment was like. She told me that in that morning she was having a breakfast. Actually, she couldn't eat, so she was sitting in front of her sister, elder sister Teriko, and they heard a siren goes off for warning, followed by the bombers flying above their heads in a summer hot day, blue sky. She couldn't see it, but she could picture it because everybody knew the sound of bombers. Interestingly, bomber just went over the sky, and they're wondering why the only single sound there. And then suddenly everything exploded, and for her it was impact with huge sound and flash. And then she almost pretty much lost her consciousness, but she was thinking, I'm gonna die, I'm gonna die, I'm gonna die, because he believed the strike was right on her house only, because nobody could imagine one bomb can destroy an entire city. So she thought the bomb fell on their home. Now, she can't quite recall exactly how long she lost her consciousness. That's pretty natural, I guess, if you are out. But when she started to come back out from that, the thinking of being killed, and gradually surroundings start to have a lights and the dust. And first thing she remembered, she told me, was the screaming voices, including her own. So she was actually screaming from the moment of impact over the time she lost her consciousness. When she came back, she was still screaming, and her sister in front of her was screaming also. Her chopstick went through her cheek because of impact, the shock. And then she told me, I asked, just try to remember exactly how she perceived that moment. And she said she actually heard screaming of entire city. She could hear lots of people everywhere was screaming at the same time. And it was very significant memory in her experience. She later wrote about it, but this is not some kind of speculation by the poetic kind of statement, because at that time I asked her, try to remember how she felt, how she remembered the sound and feel of it, temperature of it, and everything. And that's where she told me that's what she experienced. Now, that really freaked me out because there are a lot of people killed instantaneously that day. And on top of that, many people survived later, but also their life destroyed quite a major way. People got sick many years afterwards, and all that cause was one moment, and everybody screamed. I believe this is not a sort of world that humans should expect to have. And my mother always told me, only thing the hibakusha wish, there are a lot of justification issue, the what to be told, what to be agreed, what to be recorded, but the only thing is the justice they seek. The justice is that people do understand that moment was the gate to the hell was opened, and everybody to say we do not want to open that gate again, and everybody to plead and basically agree we will not waste their tragedy, their sacrifices, and we'll never do it again. That is the single most important request from the people who survived or killed in that day and the families believe. So my position is I'm not very politically active person. Having said that, in a turning point, I always step up and try to do something, one thing to say I don't want it. And this is a moment I'm doing my part. Everybody who might be participating in this webinar and listening to my story or other people's opinions and all that, it would be great if you take your own position and raise a hand and do something, one thing to say we don't want it. So that is my request on behalf of my mother. I knew very well, and hope that everybody might understand the perspective from the ground zero from the Hiroshima. Thank you.
Thank you. So that was absolutely extraordinary. What a beautiful way to get us started this evening. Really appreciated your words, those of you mothers, and just want to underline the significance and the importance of hearing this testimony firsthand from people who were there. There's nothing as significant or as important as that. For our second speaker, just for a complete change of pace and gear, I'm not actually going to introduce him. I'm going to ask Jem to roll the tape. We've got I believe this is the first time we've ever got a statement of its kind on a webinar like this for ICAN. Let's see if you can work out who it is.
Today, as we mark the 80th anniversary of the first use of nuclear weapons in Hiroshima, we remember all those who lost their lives, just like we remember all those who lost their lives with the second use of atomic weapons at Nagasaki. The Australian government shares the ambition for a world without nuclear weapons. We're taking practical steps to halt their spread, reduce the risks they will be used, and ultimately forge a path to their elimination. It is more than half a century since Australia's Whitlam Labor government signed the Treaty on Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons. We remain resolute and committed to working for a world without nuclear weapons.
All right, how's that? Let's let that one sink in. That's a statement directly from the Prime Minister of Australia, who's taken a little bit of time out of his busy schedule to address us and this issue directly. And I think we should take that as an invitation. We take him up on this offer. Prime Minister Albanese from opposition made some actually very important moves about embedding support for the nuclear ban treaty that our next couple of speakers are going to speak of in a little bit more detail into ALP policy from opposition. Then from government, on two different occasions, it's been reaffirmed as government policy, which is why I started the evening with a note of optimism that we actually have a real shot at this. And it's not every day that you get those kind of statements of support from our political leaders. But again, for a bit of a change of gear, I'd like to introduce a very, very special guest and someone who it's a bit of an honour to introduce and who probably no introduction is really going to do justice. Peter Garrett is one of the most prominent living Australians. He's a renowned activist, former politician, and of course, as a member of Midnight Oil. Peter served as president of the Australian Conservation Foundation, I think, for 2 terms, and that's an organisation that's provided leadership on this issue from its foundation all the way to the present day. Peter Garrett is a long-term advocate of keeping uranium in the ground, and particularly nuclear disarmament. This is somebody with runs on the board who's used his platform literally for decades, since long before I got involved in this thing, to make sure that our voices are heard very, very loud and clear. It's really great to have you on the call, Peter. Please take it away.
Thanks very much, Scott, and to ICAN for hosting the event. Obviously, it's an incredibly important and necessary commemoration, and in particular to hear from Isao about his mother and her experiences on the day brings forward with a really high level of pungency and meaning why we're gathered and what we're here to talk about and encourage. So look, I'll try and give a bit of an overview from my perspective on where things stand, a bit of an explainer for those who've perhaps come to the issue more recently. But I very much echo what Scott has already said about the positive prospects in what can seem like pretty dire circumstances, particularly when we look to the Middle East and other parts of the world. So I think most serious thinkers about politics and global affairs agree that we have two great existential challenges. One is the climate crisis, which of course is something of significance and picking up momentum, but an issue that we've really only had increasingly widespread public awareness of probably for 15 or 20 years, maybe a bit longer, and certainly for scientists and environmentalists and others for much longer. And the other is the challenge of nuclear disarmament and the fact that we have still collected and stored in silos and on submarines and so on and so forth around the place enough of these terribly destructive weapons as to render the world unrecognisable. And both of these, but the one that we're discussing tonight, nuclear disarmament in particular, essentially tests of our capacity, human capacity to be rational, to be moral, to embrace cooperation, to eschew ancient enmities, tribal and religious conflicts, not to be pushed around by bullies. And it's a great privilege to be able to be involved with ICAN, who has, as an organisation, as Scott said, an Australian organisation in its genesis, really expressed those values and done that work and already achieved a very great deal. So I feel that this gathering, apart from recognising the momentousness of August 6 and 9, is about building on what ICAN's done already and ensuring that the good work that's necessary for survival can be undertaken. And that means for Australia signing and ratifying the UN Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. Once the detonation above Hiroshima and later Nagasaki took place, it changed everything. Obviously and clearly it changed in an instant, in that blinding flash of light we've heard about the lives of those on the ground, Japanese people at the time. So it had a local impact which still reverberates, and the tragedy of which is very clear to see. But it also set in train a set of global events which were really about a dawning recognition of how do we work our way out of the fact that these weapons clearly have such shocking, disproportionate and really extensive power and impact. And that was the way that people thought straight away. The scientists who were involved in developing the technology around nuclear weapons, those that wrestled with their own consciences once the Americans had actually let Fat Boy out of the plane, with the end of World War II, and it's seemingly one of the full stops to World War II, an unnecessary, unwarranted and immoral stop, I would argue, but nevertheless seen as the cease of World War II, how do we then get on a path which doesn't see these weapons used again? Because future use, given what you saw at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, was literally inconceivable. And for even thoughtful military people, there was a very limited efficacy in having a weapon that could destroy so much so quickly, and to what end. And it's at this stage that the debates, the discussions, the negotiations, the development of policy that's taken place through the United Nations in the main has sought to try and contain the use of weapons and sought to try and advance disarmament. And through a number of treaties and agreements, including the one that the Prime Minister referred to, the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and notwithstanding the fact that that treaty does contain an express clause really putting it on nuclear weapons powers who were signatories to the treaty, obviously the Soviet Union, United States, United Kingdom, etc., really putting it upon them to make concrete and actual moves towards disarmament, because they were the ones that possessed the weapon, the nuclear states. At the height of the Cold War, you've got, what, 60 to 70,000 of these weapons here, never mind the cost, but the logic of deterrence essentially became exposed at that point in time because there was no possible rationale whatsoever for them to be used. It was impossible even for great powers that like to keep them in their back pocket to morally acquiesce to the suggestion that they could ever be used. And we did see through a very strong campaign, which I think we're going to renew and reinvigorate in the 2020s, the really significant sized civil campaigns around the world, particularly through Europe, the United Kingdom, here in Australia, and in other countries. And in Japan, it's always been very strong there, to really call out the madness and urge and pressure leaders and countries to start addressing the issue more seriously. I won't go into the detail of the reduction talks that were underway. It's called START, or part of it's called START. But we saw the number of weapons come down from around that 66, 70,000 mark to a much, much smaller figure, arguably 7,000, maybe 11, but it's much, much smaller. And it was, to that extent, at least partially successful. And some of you may remember as early as, I think, 2002 or 3, President Obama was very confident that we were on that path towards reducing further numbers of nuclear warheads that were being stored, and that disarmament was within reach. Now, of course, the last 10 or 15 years or so have been particularly difficult and have interrupted that very necessary and powerful move towards sanity. History has happened, events have interfered. We know what's tragically happening in the Middle East. Russia's become increasingly autocratic. The Chinese have seen fit to increase their nuclear arsenal. The Non-Proliferation Treaty and the framework itself is stalled. And there's a possibility that though it's held the big powers in a kind of balance for some time, it could fall apart. And those remaining nuclear powers are unwilling, it seems, to advance disarmament. The review conferences that we see of the Non-Proliferation Treaty essentially falling down into a blocking process where no real progress can be made. So the partial stymieing of the global disarmament effort would be a cause of massive concern, and it's troubling and worrying. But of course, it also reinforces the urgency that real action has to be taken. And at the same time, we've seen the work initiated by ICAN picked up in many other countries around the world, which resulted in an actual UN treaty, a new UN treaty, which literally prohibits the possession and use of nuclear weapons. And that was seen as a way around the stalled non-proliferation treaty negotiations. It was seen as a way of getting past the roadblocks of the great powers, building global momentum where countries could feel satisfied and positive that disarmament could happen through a new treaty. And to its very great credit, it needs to be said again, ICAN was quite instrumental in that work. And that's where we are now, friends. And Australia's role is one that can be both positive and important, particularly given that up to this point in time, the Australian government, as the Labor Party itself, which I've served with in the past, has it as part of its platform, as Scott said. It's been reiterated on a number of occasions. And the Prime Minister himself, before he came into that role, was a champion of a treaty which would prohibit the use of nuclear weapons. And there's a very straightforward and important task in front of all of us now, which is to not only persuade our fellow Australians of the importance and urgency of that task, but the government as well. And I'm encouraged to some extent by the Prime Minister's words, where he says the government remains resolute and committed to working for a world without nuclear weapons. The answer to which is there's no better way to do that than fulfill the promise that you've made and fulfill the promise that lies in a path to disarmament. And it's true that we've got the benefit of having a political party in power that has shown some commitments to disarmament previously. In fact, the work done by the Keating government and the Canberra Commission under former Foreign Minister Garrett Evans, for those of you who follow this closely, was really outstanding and deserved to be taken up more fully in the international community. But I'm diverging. What we do envisage, though, is the capacity for a middle-ranked power with other like-minded nations to build the tenor of pressure and encouragement, not only for Australia to sign the treaty and then ratify it, but to bring other countries on board, and that overall political pressure through the UN to lead us on a much better path to disarmament. I should very quickly say in the time left to me that through all the ups and downs of my political life and activism life, this has been an issue which has remained right at the core of what I hope that I could do in the circumstances that I was in. I travelled to Hiroshima in 1983, visited the Peace Museum, developed a relationship with Hibakusha then, Isao, your country people at that point in time, and was viscerally aware of the immorality of what had happened and the suffering that it had caused. And I did note that the mayor of the Hiroshima region was recently quoted in an article which people may have seen, really reminding us of the point that was both made by Scott and Isao, and that is that we remember this terrible historical event and the suffering that went with it, but it's not something that's in the past, it's something that's still in the present, because it needs to be responded to and dealt with now. So as another writer more eloquent than me has said, tonight is really about a shared human aspiration for peace and security, and it's one that I think touches people very deeply. It does require international cooperation, but it requires person to person, person to community, and person to government interaction. It honours the experience, the terrible experiences of those who lost their lives or suffered when they survived at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It honours the experience of our First Peoples at Maralinga. It honours the experiences and the suffering of service people at Montebello and other places as well, our neighbours in the South Pacific. And by focusing, working, committing or recommitting to the work that ICAN is doing and to the disarmament path, we're essentially expressing the hope and showing that that's the best that we can be and what we should be trying to do to make and to create a world that's free of nuclear weapons. So it is about peace and humanity, and these are words and ideas and values that count more than ever before. And that's what tonight is about as well. So wishing all those who are participating good strength along the way. Thanks very much, Scott.
That's brilliant. Thanks so much, Peter. I feel like I want to set some of that to music. Thank you for that, your contribution, and for your decades of work and advocacy on this one. This is one, in a way, the kind of overarching issue under an umbrella under which most of our other work takes place and is made possible. So we're going to roll on with some political voices and some shout outs from folk who aren't able to be with us directly tonight. The next person we're going to hear from is Helen Haines, who's the federal member for Indi in Victoria, which is an electorate that's got a pretty long history of sending very independently minded people into the federal parliament. Helen's, I think, again, going to remind us that we have a majority of supporters, of sign-ups, of folk who have ICAN have gone door to door in the offices in that big white building, getting people to commit to this. And Helen is one of those on the crossbench who's done so.
These are uncertain and unpredictable global times. It's not the time to further the expansion of weapons of war, especially nuclear weapons, weapons with catastrophic consequences. Prior to being elected to government, the Labor Party pledged to sign and ratify the United Nations Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, a promise that more than 3 years on, they're not yet to fulfil. The Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombings inflicted unprecedented devastation. Tens of thousands perished, infrastructure crumbled, and radiation caused ongoing illness for survivors. As we mark 80 years since these bombings, amid ongoing global conflict, we're reminded of the profound responsibility we share to hold our leaders to account. Peace and compassion must prevail, and the path forward must include respect for international law and diplomatic conventions. Now, more than ever, it's the responsibility of our leaders to stand against war and be unwavering champions for peace. Let us hold them to that standard.
There's always one boomer on every call who mutes himself by mistake. Thank you to Helen and her crew from In Absentia. Our next speaker is also somebody from the crossbench, a good friend of mine, Senator David Shoebridge, who's the Senator for New South Wales, who I think has portfolio coverage of this issue as well and has had for a couple of years, a friend of ICAN, a friend of the Nuclear Weapons Ban Treaty. Take it away, Senator David Shoebridge.
80 years ago, the world saw the devastation of nuclear weapons being used in Hiroshima. Any world where nuclear weapons exist is one where the world is not safe. No country should have the ability to literally end human existence. And that's what's at stake when we're talking about global nuclear war. The horrors of nuclear weapons being used on civilian populations can never be repeated. And Australia must do all it can to bring about a world without nuclear weapons. It's Labor policy to sign and ratify the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. Yet the choice by this government, the Albanese government, to ignore that promise, ignore its members and ignore a more peaceful world is making the world more dangerous. Signing the treaty would also be a powerful step towards stopping militarisation and ending the escalation and potential increase in nuclear weapons on the planet. It would also mean a powerful way that we could call on our allies to stop nuclear proliferation by taking that step, taking that action as a middle power. For the first time in a generation, the US is again stationing nuclear weapons in the United Kingdom. We should have no part of that, and that is another powerful reason for us to get out of AUKUS. Not only should we not be acquiring nuclear submarines and being part of that global nuclear fuel cycle, being part of AUKUS means we're a part of the US's global nuclear stationing. We also know that the US is likely stationing nuclear weapons in Australia, with B-52s capable of carrying nuclear weapons being positioned in Tyndall Air Base just south of Darwin. Australia should make it clear that our continent, our country, has no place for nuclear weapons. Peace can only happen when people call for it and demand our governments act on it. And we must drown out warmongering. We need to cancel AUKUS. We need to sign the treaty. It's time to ban the bomb.
Authorised by J. McCall, Australian Greens, Canberra.
Thank you, dear Senator David. Just checking my run sheet. So, Jem. So we've heard quite a bit of political voices from across the spectrum, including the Prime Minister of the country, including the crossbench, and we've been hearing all along about this mysterious ban treaty. Now, I know some of the folk on the call will be very familiar with the ban treaty, but maybe some of you haven't heard of it. Maybe you're not familiar with the intricacies of United Nations process, and you're not sure even how an instrument like this could help. I'm here to tell you that it can. And Jem is going to give us the lowdown on where this thing has come from and what we can do right now to get Australia onto the right side of it. I also want to point out that we've got 230 people on the call, which I think is a bit of a record for one of these. It's really impressive that you're all here with us. And now we're getting to the nuggety stuff. Now we're getting to the part where we actually can get hands-on and bring this campaign home. Jem, who's been with ICAN from the beginning, take it away.
Thanks so much, Scott, and it is so wonderful to see you all here tonight. Yes, it's a big audience for us, so I think people are feeling really moved and motivated at this point in time to take action, so that's awesome. I'm calling in from Dharawal country in Wollongong tonight, and of course we're gathering in remembrance and in dedication for the Hibakusha, the victims and the survivors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, who've spent their lives warning us that nuclear weapons and humanity cannot coexist. But we remember also the victims and the survivors of the first nuclear explosion in New Mexico, the people sacrificed under the Trinity fallout. And we remember the vast areas of land and the uncountable number of people whose lives were poisoned by nuclear weapons testing, from Kazakhstan to China, the Marshall Islands, Algeria, Maui Nui, Montebello Islands, Emu Field, Maralinga. Nuclear weapons have brought nothing but devastation, long-lived contamination, illness, death, social isolation, and the insidious uncertainty that survivors live with. And as we're looking at these images from the past and remembering the horrors wrought by these weapons of mass destruction, we also turn our eyes to today's reality. The rubble of Gaza, the burnt, the wounded, the starving Palestinian people. And the genocide being perpetrated by Israel is part of the same pattern, the unchecked aggression of the nuclear armed states acting with impunity. The people sacrificed for the sake of toxic political alliances, the disregard for international law, and the cold-blooded power of the weapons industry. But we don't accept this, and we will not look away. Nuclear weapons are at the very apex of human depravity. 80 years on from their invention, there are 12,000 of the things still hanging over our heads, threatening our existence every day, and their yield far more powerful and terrible than the bombs of 1945. Hiroshima and Nagasaki are not just about history, they're a warning. A single nuclear weapon on a major city today would kill hundreds of thousands of people in minutes. There's no emergency response, no hospital system in the aftermath of a nuclear bomb. Radioactive fallout crosses borders, infects the earth. Climate disruption from even a limited nuclear war could lead to global famine. The 9 nuclear armed states are modernizing and spending billions on their arsenals. In 2024 alone, they spent more than $100 billion just in 1 year. The risk of nuclear war, whether by intent, accident, or miscalculation, is rising. If we don't get rid of them, they will be used. It could be in 30 years, or 5, or it could be later tonight. Just a few days ago, President Trump was moving nuclear-armed submarines closer to Russia. Nuclear posturing is not a game. One day it will become real, and the well-rehearsed plans for nuclear weapons use will be executed. Australia's defence policy still clings to the outdated concept of extended nuclear deterrence, the idea of protection under the US nuclear arsenal. This is a reckless concept that undermines our security. And it's a theory that's been really successfully propagated by the nuclear armed states to justify their ongoing possession of nuclear weapons. And it's the key barrier to disarmament. It's time to move on. Nuclear weapons are never a legitimate means of defense. And now AUKUS is increasingly unpopular, and that's for really good reason. It ties us closer to US nuclear war planning. It undermines our sovereignty, robs us of the funds that we desperately need to address urgent global problems, and it amplifies the drums of war. We don't want submarines fueled with weapons-grade, highly enriched uranium. We don't want nuclear weapons in Australia, on any platform, not on planes or submarines for any amount of time, not even visiting for 10 minutes. We have the right, we should have the right to reject this strategic ambiguity. We have the right to know if there are nuclear weapons here and to say no nuclear weapons on these sacred lands and waters that we call Australia. But there is a way forward. The Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, which we've talked about a lot tonight, it's our best chance against our worst weapons. It bans nuclear weapons comprehensively, and it's broken the disarmament deadlock, and it's the first international treaty to do this. It possessing, developing, testing, threatening to use, using them, assisting with them, pretty much everything to do with nuclear weapons is illegal. So it's about getting rid of the weapons, and also it's about nuclear justice, seeking repair for the harm that they've done on nuclear test and use sites around the world, and that's in Articles 6 and 7 of the treaty. And it's intended to work like the other treaties that ban inhumane weapons. You ban the weapon, you stigmatize it, spur divestment, isolate the countries that possess them, and put them out in the cold. Already, 94 nations have signed, 73 are states parties, and there's more on the way. That's half the world already. And it's almost all of Australia's neighbours. Indonesia, the Philippines, Thailand, Fiji, New Zealand, almost all ASEAN and Pacific nations. And Australia is really critical in this. We could be the first nuclear endorsing country to sign on. And we'd be getting on the right side of history, but it's more than that. We know that this would help pave the way for other countries, also under pressure from the nuclear bullies, not to sign on. This treaty could turn the ship around and catalyse a new era of disarmament. And Australia's signature would spark a global shift. So we're working to turn around the massive public and political support for this treaty into action. We want to see signature in this term of government. 3/4 of Labor's federal caucus have pledged their support. The ALP platform commits to signing and ratifying the treaty, first in 2018, then in 2021 and 2023, reaffirmed while in government. And Anthony Albanese himself championed this policy. And when he introduced the motion in 2018 to the National Conference, he held ICAN's Nobel Peace Prize medal aloft. We got some opinion polling done on support for Australia to join the treaty, and we've released it today, and it says that 2/3 of the Australian public want our government to sign this treaty, and only 11% don't want to do that. So it's pretty obvious what path we should take. We also asked about support for whether it's acceptable for nations to threaten each other with nuclear weapons. And unsurprisingly, about 78% of respondents said no, that's not acceptable. And only about 10% said it was. There's so much happening in the campaign right now. It's been a really big time, and it's amazing to see so much momentum, at all levels of government and in the community. Just in the last couple of weeks, the Perth City Council endorsed the treaty, endorsing the ICAN Cities Appeal, and they're the 51st council to do so around the country. The last two before Perth were the West Arnhem Regional Council in the NT and Victor Harbour in South Australia. There were motions tabled in both the Federal House of Representatives and Senate in support of the treaty last week. And just this morning, a motion was passed in the New South Wales Parliament with good, strong language, recognising the treaty as a vital international instrument to achieve a world free of nuclear weapons. The Victorian Labor Party passed a strong motion at their conference last weekend, and we've got new federal and more state and territory MPs signing on to the ICAN parliamentary pledge. There are unions and councils and civil society nationwide getting really active, and I want to just call out a few because I'm sure there are many of you in the crowd and many that I'll miss as well, but there's been a great motion from the Independent Education Union, the Maritime Union of Australia, First Nations Rank and File, the New South Wales Teachers Federation, the Australian Services Union, Victorian Trades Hall Council. I hope some of you have seen our massive banner on the side of the building there that's up for a couple of weeks now. The Uniting Church, Australian Lawyers for Human Rights, the Medical Association for Prevention of War that birthed ICAN, Doctors for the Environment, and so many of you who have individually sent letters to the Prime Minister clamouring for Australia to join this bloody treaty already. So let's take this momentum forward. We've got many old and new friends here now, and I ask all of you to go away from this event with the nuclear victims and the survivors in your hearts and the fire in your belly. And I want you to do what you can. Take Isau's message to do one thing or two things or three. Send that letter to the Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister. You can find it on the front page of the ICAN Australia website. And if you've done that, that's wonderful. Take this to your MP federally, and especially if they're one of the new ones, and ask what they're doing to get this treaty on the agenda. You know, don't just indicate your support, but be active within the parliament, within their parties, to put this forward, because, you know, they need you hassling them to then hassle in turn within their parties. Take it to your local council, your union, your political branch if you're in one, your faith leaders, and keep the expectation high. Yes, this is difficult, but what we do changes the shape of what's possible, and it is feasible. This is something that can happen, and it will be incredibly impactful when it does. 80 years after Hiroshima, we want to heed the call of the Hibakusha, and we want to refuse to let another lifetime pass under the shadow of the mushroom cloud. The public is with us. We have the tools, we have a plan. There's no excuse for delay. Let's make this the term that Australia signs on to the ban treaty. Thank you.
Just fantastic, Jem. Thank you so much. And so this is the point where we hand it back to you. This has always been a people-powered movement. That's what it's going to be since 1945 to 2025. 80 years. It's just been ordinary people who've been behind the movement to ban nuclear weapons. And you'll see that we've brought it to a place where we've never really had it before in this country. If you look up at Parliament House, you'll see a building with a majority in both houses of people who support the nuclear weapons ban treaty. And if you're wandering around in the streets of our cities and towns right across this continent, you will know that you are in the majority of Australians who support signing on to this treaty and to banning nuclear weapons forever. There are 195 countries in the world, and 9 of them wield these weapons in what amounts to a form of global suicide pact with hydrogen bombs, holding the rest of the planet to a form of radioactive ransom that is simply unacceptable. But there's another set of countries, those that don't possess the nuclear weapons, countries known as the so-called nuclear umbrella states. Those countries, like Australia, like the membership of NATO, and like other countries with major security alliances with the United States or other nuclear weapon states, but it's mostly the US, who have in our defence doctrine, and this includes Australia, and you can look it up, that we support the use of US nuclear weapons in the territorial defence of Australia. Whatever the hell that would look like, in reality, it looks like Armageddon. And that's in Australia's defence doctrine. And we also heard Jem just describing the creeping movement of nuclear weapons, not just into defence policy, but potentially onto bases via US bombers in the Northern Territory and across Northern Australia, potentially via visiting nuclear submarines and other kinds of warships. So we're creeping in the wrong direction. And if the best thing that could happen right now, if the Australian government wants to uphold the commitments that it's made to the public and to its own membership, from opposition and again from government, to permanently get rid of that ambiguity, both in doctrine and in practice, is to sign the nuclear weapons ban treaty. It's absolutely time that we signed. And so it's really over to you. You've heard from these like incredible individuals who've been working on this issue for over such a long period of time, some of them in significant positions of political power. And it's over really now to all of us. If you have a look, and I've been following the chat a little bit as well. We've got Annette Brownlee from ICAN, the Independent and Peaceful Australian Network, doing incredible work on AUKUS and on nuclear issues more generally. We've got David Noonan in the chat talking about the fact that we become a nuclear weapons target. There's been a lot of really interesting question and discussion in the chat over the evening. But I'm just going to ask you to do a couple of really quick things. And the first thing is this. Go to the ICAN website. So it's icanw.org.au and just have a look around there. It's an incredible wealth of resources on the history and what brought us here, on the campaign to abolish nuclear weapons. And there's also a very significant and simple thing that we can do, particularly having just seen Prime Minister Albanese's message to us directly tonight, is to sign on to that letter, find out who your MPs are, whether they're Labor MPs, whether they're crossbenchers, whether they're coalition MPs who have been known to support the ban treaty, and write to them tonight. Off the energy of the story that you heard from Isao, of Peter's testimony, of the ideas that you just heard from Jem, sign on to that letter. And if you already have, and maybe you already have, pass it on to your mates, put it on social media, spread the word and get it out there, that the Prime Minister hears that we've got his back and that this is something that needs to be done now to bring this campaign to a close. Now, we know that Australians signing on to the treaty won't be the end of it. There's a long, complex process of ratification that could potentially take months or years. We'll get to that. What we need now in this term of government, with thumping progressive majorities in both houses of Parliament, depending on how you consider that word to be used, what we have now is the best opportunity of our lifetimes for Australia to get on the right side of this one, back up the work that we did developing the NPT, the Canberra Commission, the work Kevin Rudd did with the Kawaguchi, Gareth Evans Commission when he was in government, and to close the deal, get Australia on the right side of this. I want to thank everybody who brought us together tonight for your stories, all the work that goes on behind the scenes for this one, and close us out with thanks from me and from all of the organisers. It's just so much appreciated that you were here, and we'll see you on the campaign trail.
Hey, Scott. And everyone, hi. I just wanted to add that there's one more video that we wanted to play, if that's all right, not to disrupt your beautiful closing, but this one just came out this morning, and I think Jesse will have that ready to play. It's been put forward by the wonderful musician Eliza Hull, who rallied some of her famous mates with big followings, and they've put this together for us, and it's been launched today. So big thanks to Eliza Hull.
80 years ago, Hiroshima was destroyed by an atomic bomb. 3 days later, Nagasaki.
Hundreds of thousands of lives were lost. The survivors have carried the memory and the warning.
Since then, nuclear weapons have left a trail of devastation.
Tested on First Nations land, here and worldwide, poisoning generations.
They are part of a global pattern of violence where powerful states, armed to the teeth, do terrible things with impunity.
From the radioactive deserts of Australia and the Pacific to the rubble of Gaza, civilians continue to pay the price for the denial of justice and the disregard for international law.
Today, 12,000 nuclear weapons still threaten our every waking moment.
Just a fraction of this global stockpile could end our world in an afternoon.
But we refuse to accept this fate.
A global movement has risen for truth, justice, and a future without nuclear weapons.
In 2017, history was made.
The Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons was adopted by the UN.
It entered into force in 2021.
For the first time, nuclear weapons are banned. Australians want our country to join.
Our leaders have promised but haven't yet signed. It's time for Australia to choose.
To sign the treaty, to uphold international law, and to end nuclear weapons before they end us.
And it's a wrap. Thanks so much for joining us, everyone. We'll see you on the campaign trail.